seen my kind before. I'm the starry-eyed girl standing in the front row of the concert, singing every syllable, arm held aloft in solidarity with the music. The girl who knows what the bassist drinks and where the singer attended college. I wasn't always this way. My life began on a remote farm in Arkansas, surrounded by cows and rolling hills. It was lonely for a girl with a big imagination, especially in the days before cell phones, satellite TV, and the internet. But I did have music, and that was my connection to the world. I started small, by writing letters, like the one I wrote begging Janet Jackson to play concerts in nearby Fayetteville. I settled for joining her fan club when she just wasn't able to work that into her schedule. But it wasn't possible to meet my idols in person. I mean, the closest we had to a celebrity back home was that bank manager who used to be a University of Arkansas cheerleader. Once I was exposed to more obscure music, however, I realized my true calling in life. I am a fangirl for underdogs. My first in-the-flesh fan encounter was during my junior year abroad in Dublin. One of my idols, barely famous Irish singer Gavin Friday, was eating dinner with U2's drummer in a hole-in-the-wall restaurant. I left my table and approached his. After touching his shoulder and then poking him a little bit harder until he turned around, I choked out something like, "Your songs mean so much to me, and you've changed my life, and I'm so sorry for ruining your dinner." Even though the rest of the patrons howled in laughter at my stammering American earnestness, I was euphoric as I sailed out of that restaurant. I had communicated what I so badly needed to communicate, that Gavin Friday had made a difference to me. The most meaningful fan encounter came 3 years later. I was living in Arkansas, working a boring office job, totally in love with the front man for Welsh indie band Super Furry Animals. The Super Furries had a large UK following, but were mostly unheard of in the States. Their singer, Griff Rhys, was a tall, skinny, handsome intellectual who drove around in a military tank and sang in politically charged mix of Welsh and English. We had never met. But I spent my evenings learning Welsh from audio tapes, just in case. And one of those evenings, I paid $37 in an online auction to win a loaf of bread baked by Griff himself. I was sure that winning this auction was the start of a beautiful relationship that would culminate in a stone chapel on a windswept Welsh mountain as I said I do in Griff's native tongue and he married the girl who bought the homemade bread. Weeks passed with agonizing updates from the auction manager. They're in the studio. He'll bake it this weekend. No, it's next Saturday. And then finally, the bread is done. It was all happening. Years of fandom finally paying off. I would leave this backwater town and go back to the British Isles where my heart belonged, surrounded by the music that made me feel everything. The bread was stopped at customs and was not allowed to leave the UK. Instead, I received a box of rare Super Furry Animals memorabilia and a lovely handwritten note from Griff Rhys. It was a sweet and acceptable substitute. I framed the letter. A year later, I moved to Austin. Super Furry Animals were on tour, and I had tickets to both Texas dates. My friend and I drove up to Dallas for the first show. We were hanging out on the upper level at Trees when I saw him. Griff Rhys. 10 feet away, watching the dreadful opening band. He was alone, as if surrounded by an impenetrable halo of angels or rainbows or unicorns. This was my chance! I didn't trust myself to speak, so I fished around my purse for some pen and paper. My knees were shaking as I walked up to him and handed him a note. It said, "Hi, Griff. "Where's my bread?" He read it, looked down at me, and cracked a huge smile. "You won the bread?" In his lilting Welsh accent, he lamented the narrow worldview of UK customs and told me how sorry he was. Then he hugged me, voluntarily. Bliss does not even begin to describe what I was feeling. "Wait right here," he said before disappearing backstage. 5 minutes later, he returned with a loaf of sliced bread and a rueful smile. "It's not as good as homemade," he said. But I was astounded that he cared enough to find me a replacement loaf. I thanked him profusely, and he left to go get ready for the show. I clutched the bread to my chest as Super Furry Animals put on the best concert I'd ever seen, and I could not wait to see him again in Austin the next night. Back at home, I put the bread in the freezer for safekeeping and got ready for the show. My new boyfriend was going with me, and he didn't seem to mind that I was a rabid fangirl. In fact, he liked Super Furry Animals too. I even charmed him into helping me bake cookies before the concert. At the venue, I found Griff at the side of the stage, standing by himself, just like in Dallas. "I baked you cookies!" I shouted over the same dreadful opening band. "For the band, these have nuts and these don't, in case anyone is allergic." I held out the baggies of cookies, and he took them gingerly. "Now we're even. You gave me bread, I baked you cookies." The look in his eyes said, "Back away slowly, so the crazy girl won't know you're on to her poisoning scheme." I was mortified. I had ruined everything with my stupid, overzealous cookie baking. I stayed for the concert, but the magic just wasn't there anymore. Years passed. I saw a few Super Furry Animals show, but I kept my distance. No more bread, no more cookies. That dream was over. Instead, I moved to Dallas, married the boyfriend, and eventually threw out the freezer-burned bread. These days, I'm more likely to rave about a debut author than some band you haven't heard of and I have. The awkward fan encounters are gone. Well, pretty much. Last January, I met notoriously shy author John Green on his book tour. I handed him my copy of his latest bestseller to sign, as well as a handmade t-shirt inspired by that book. He joked that all his clothes were dirty, so he might wear it soon. Naturally, I offered to do his laundry. Other than that, totally reformed. Last summer, Griff Reese embarked upon a small solo tour of the U.S. There were no Texas dates, so I flew to Memphis for the show. I sat alone in the audience, heart racing, wearing a grin so big my cheeks hurt. For me and the other 40 fans there, it was a magical night, with Griff's warbling mix of Welsh and English uniting us in song. Afterward, I waited for my friend to pick me up from the club. Griff was standing at the side of the bar, graciously chatting with a few fans. I told myself I didn't need to bother him this time. But my friend was late. And my hands were already shaking. "Hi, Griff? A long time ago, you gave me a loaf of bread." His face lit up. "In Dallas? Yes, that's me!" It turns out that Griff Reese still thinks about the bread every now and then and still feels bad that I didn't get a homemade loaf. We talked for a few minutes, the graying Welsh singer and the not-so-young fan, almost like old friends. This time, I hugged him before hurrying back into the real world. I will always be the star-struck girl with a huge imagination. I know I'll never go home with the singer. But I can't stop loving music or caring about the people who make it. Songs will always serve as memories, they'll fuel my dreams, and they will be my connection to the world. Crazy Bread Girl lives on, my friends. She lives on!